Hi everyone! For a long time I've suffered from pain in my right hand, my wrists in particular, and it's really held me back with one of my favorite hobbies, playing video games. Now the sane choice would be to just stop playing video games, but that's a hard thing to do. It's one of my favorite hobbies, and so I've pursued a different option, which is to only play games with my left hand. My left hand is my non-dominant hand. I haven't used it nearly as much in my life, and it's luckily mostly spared in terms of wrist pain. Now that's a good idea to practice, playing video games with just one hand, just your left hand, if you suffer from pain in your dominant hand. However, it really does limit the sort of games you can play. In particular, anything that's an action game like first-person shooter typically requires two analog sticks, and it's really hard to control two analog sticks with one hand. You really need two hands. So, in this video I'm going to talk about the accommodations that I have taken that have made it so that I can play games that require two analog sticks and do it with minimal pain. Not zero pain, but a lot less than I used to have. So there's a lot of things that can cause pain in your wrist. I'm not a doctor, and I'm certainly not going to pretend that I can diagnose what is causing your pain. I'm only going to tell you about what seems to cause my pain and what has solved it for me. Hopefully you can put this to use in your life if in fact you have the same cause as I do. So the thing to understand is that when you flex your fingers, when you bring them together to push buttons on your controller, to hold your controller, it causes muscles in your palm, but also in your arm to constrict. And when things constrict, they take up more space. And this increased consumption of space inside this very tight passageway here causes compression on the nerves, and that's what typically causes carpal tunnel pain. So the major technique here is to try and reduce the amount of force that your fingers are using to hold and play with a controller. So let's consider the first thing about a controller. Clearly, it's meant to be held in your hand. I mean, look at how natural that is. But you are now constantly constricting the muscles that hold these fingers in place the whole time that you're playing. Those fingers are not doing anything useful in terms of controlling your character. They're just causing wear and tear and stress on your wrist. So we need to stop doing that. And so the solution is to not hold the controller. You can see controllers actually hold themselves pretty well if you just put them on a surface like a table. Maybe if you get like a rubber mat or something like that, you can even keep it more still than just on a hard, slippery surface like this. But there's plenty of ways that you can keep the controller steady, such as even just resting on your leg, without using your fingers and constricting them like this. So that's one important technique. Let's now consider the all-important thumbsticks. Normal thumbstick control involves moving your thumb around. That's why it's called a thumbstick. But moving your thumb means using the muscles that control your thumb. And the goal, as I said earlier, is to try and use the muscles in your wrist and in your forearm as little as possible. So, if at all possible, use your hand like this and move your shoulder and forearm instead of your fingers. You can do that with both hands. So you can control both of these sticks just fine without moving your thumbs. And for games that aren't particularly twitch-oriented, that's going to be good enough. Now, question is, can you do that and also push the buttons? And that gets a little harder. So certainly if you can do something like this, where you have one hand on here and one finger over here, you can sort of do it. And that leaves fingers here. Ideally, you can even have situations where you use just your whole hand to push buttons in isolation. If you rock back and forth, you can actually push them in isolation or together. So that's an option. And although it's pretty hard to control both of these at the same time, you can easily enough switch back and forth like that. So that's one option. It's not ideal, but it is an option that you can try out with basically no extra effort. Now here's one thing I want to point out. That sort of approach gives you very little access to these trigger and bumper buttons. So that's why I like these Nintendo Switch controllers. Even though I don't own a Switch, I don't play Switch games, it has a total of 4 buttons up here, one more than on Xbox controller. And you can map these buttons to these trigger and bumper buttons. So now you have access to those without having to get your fingers around the edge. That makes this sort of approach much better. Now, this is the thing you can try very easily and see if it helps you. However, it's obviously not really going to work for action games. And so for action games, you need to move to the next more advanced step, which is mounting the controller such that you can actually get your hand, let's get a better view of this, get your hand around it like this. And so you've got your, let's say, what is that called? The cushion of your palm. I don't think that's actually the right word, but whatever it is, you get it there, and then you wrap your fingers around here. And so now you can control your joystick completely, and you have these two buttons available to you with relatively complete control. In other words, you can push them whenever you want and move the stick. If you need to push these buttons, you usually have to let go of the stick, but that's okay. Usually you can get away with having a total of 4 buttons pretty well. And those 4 buttons are going to be these guys here. So again, having the original trigger buttons mapped up here and then mapping these to whatever action your game requires is a good solution. So that's the simple approach. In my next video, I'm going to show what I've done that takes it to the next level, which is to basically split the controller apart into 2 so that I can hold the joystick with as little stress in my hands as possible and with the most flexibility of what buttons to push.